All right, so last class we talked about Blender and the basics of Blender. We talked about navigating through the program. So for instance, I have a 3-button mouse here, and I strongly recommend that you use a 3-button mouse when using Blender. Just makes your life easier. So for instance, the first thing I'm going to do, let's pretend this is my 3D object. I can do what's called orbiting, which means I take the camera and I orbit around the model. To do that, I'm basically just going to click and hold the middle mouse button, drag around. You can see I'm orbiting around my cube. I can zoom in and out on my object. On a 3-button mouse, I can use the middle mouse button, the scroll wheel, to zoom in and out. For some reason, you don't want to use the scroll wheel or you don't have a 3-button mouse, you can use the zoom tool there. Just literally click on it and drag to zoom in and out. By clicking and holding with your left mouse button. I can also pan, which means that my camera will move up, down, left, or right, as opposed to orbiting or zooming. On a 3-button mouse, you can hold down the Shift and middle mouse button, and that allows me to pan my object. Another way to do that would be using the hand tool. We talked about dividing up your user interface into panels, and, switching between panels. When you have a panel, there's always in the upper left-hand corner, there's always a little icon here, and if you click on it, it would actually give you a drop-down of any possible panel. I'm going to be honest, most of these we're not really use. The main ones we're going to use are the 3D viewport. Eventually, we will use the UV editor, although we haven't gotten there yet. The outliner, the properties. Eventually, we use the timeline, not right now. And that's kind of it. And the other ones are maybe the shade editor down the line. So let's say I wanted to switch to the outliner just for whatever reason. Boom, there's the outliner. Or I can switch it, boom, to the properties panel. I can take a panel like this and divide it by, if I click on the little gutter, right click, where it says vertical or horizontal split, a vertical split splits it in the vertical direction. Now I have 2 panels. So if I wanted to have more than one viewport or view of the same object or my scene, I could do that. If you want to merge 2 panels, if you right click rather than using split vertical or horizontal split, you can do what's called join. Join will let you join. If I join to the right, whatever is selected will merge these 2. If I join, or sorry, that would be first. Yeah. Join left. Join right, we take this and merge it to the right. We can merge down. All right. This thing that kind of looks like a life preserver, that is my 3D cursor. Kind of like right, by default, it starts in the middle of your world. Just gonna kind of place it. When you add a 3D object to your world, if you're going through the object menu, wherever it is, that's where the object will be added. So for instance, if I go to add mesh, remember a mesh is a collection of polygons. So if I added any of these objects, like a cube or a cone or a torus, torus is like a donut, essentially. You'll see it gets added where my cursor was, okay? Anytime you do something in Blender, that's bottom left, this is like the last command you did. It would give you options that you can kind of mess around with this. So for instance, this would let me play around with like the size of this object. I could play around with how many geometry pieces there are. Okay. When I highlight my model, I can tell it's highlighted because it has this orange halo around it. I can use tools like the move tool to move it around. I'm moving based on the axis point. In Blender, the red is always the x-axis, the green is always the y-axis, and the blue is always the z-axis. So I'm moving my object around in 3D space. I can also rotate it in 3D space. And I can scale the object in 3D space. Another way to do this is if you want to be very particular, if the object is highlighted over here in our properties panel. Remember, properties are properties about the highlighted object. In this case, this donut or this torus. Over here under transform, for instance, it's telling me the exact location in XYZ coordinate space. So it's at 2, -1.7, -1.26. If I really wanted to be precise about its location or its rotation in one direction or its scale in one direction, I could, use these panels here to be very precise. So for instance, just for the sake of argument, let's say I want it back at the origin of the world. That would be 0, 0, and 0. Okay. Or if I want it exactly in the +5 direction, and for z, there's +5. Okay. So you can be very precise if you want to do that. So I can move, rotate, scale my object. I can also manipulate the geometry that makes up this object. Okay. I'm going to put this into wireframe mode. To do that, I can either click in the upper right-hand corner, this thing that kind of looks like a wireframe sphere, or I can hold down the Z key. And if I hold that down, I get a little pop-up menu that says wireframe or solid. I'm going to choose wireframe. Okay. So this is the geometry that makes up this particular model. These are polygons. Polygons are shapes, like a square or a rectangle or a triangle, that sort of thing. I'm going to put my object into edit mode just so we can see the pieces a little bit better. So these points here, let me use a better color. These are called vertexes or vertices, plural. Vertices, it might be a little hard to see with the light on, but vertices are where edges come together. Okay, so when edges come together, you will get a vertice. Between two vertices is an edge. Think of an edge like the side in geometry. If you have a side of a shape, this is like this. So between two vertices is an edge. When you connect 3 or more edges together that are, boxed together, you get a face or a shape. So for instance, this here would be a rectangle or a face. So if I did this, that is a face. Okay. If you want to know a little bit more about your object, if I'm in object mode, I'm going to go down here to the lower right-hand corner. Here it says 4.3. That's the version of the software. But if you right-click, you can get what's called scene statistics. See where it says scene statistics? I'm going to turn that on. And if I do that, it actually will tell me. A little hard to see here, but trust me, there's the name of the object, and it actually tells me how many vertices there are, how many faces there are, how many triangles. Don't worry about that. Triangles, every face gets divided into triangles, essentially. Why triangles? Because those are the smallest, simplest shapes. It's easier for computers to calculate triangles than it is to calculate rectangles or squares or things like that. So this would tell me how many vertices, how many faces are in the selected object. So I know I have 152 vertices and about 150 faces here, in case you care. I'm going to put this into edit mode. I'm going to do that by, if I have the object selected, doesn't matter if it's wireframe or not, I can go here under object, under edit, or I can hit the tab key. Tab would also switch between edit object and edit mode. Once you're in edit mode, you can highlight the subcomponents of that model, which is the vertices, the edges, and the faces, and manipulate. So for instance, if I come into here and I highlight some of these vertices, as I'm doing right now, highlighted a couple. Once they're highlighted, I will move them, thus affecting my shape. Okay. I can highlight edges, which means I would highlight the edge. I could move that around to edit. I could also do things like scaling it, bring them closer together, or the vertices closer together or farther apart. I could also rotate a bit to affect my shape. I can also select faces. If I select these faces, I'm going to pull them like that. And I'm changing around my object. Okay.